doesn't hurt. I said, well, sometimes, sometimes, but it goes away. So I've been kind of ignoring this one up here for a long time. That one's gonna have to come out, for sure. We'll do that one.
Well, if you do need to drive a car, drive over there, let me know, I'll drive you over there.
No, I've been in work and driven, so I think I'll be okay. And the fact is, less than 2 miles one way is also, and I know the route very well.
All the pressures on like always do.
All right.
I see there's no more there. There is. I guess I try not to ever be political or anything like that. But to me, Memorial Day is something that's different. You know, we're not celebrating the military necessarily or anything like that, but we are remembering those who died in the service of our country. And to me, that's something different. I heard this story about this individual, Alan Ho, this week. And I thought, you know, I need to share that, share the story with the class. So, and I've tried to decide exactly how to do it. And I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but anyway, he was honored a few years ago at one of the Memorial Day tributes. I want to play this. Alan Ho he was in the Vietnam War. He served as a medic. After he's from Hawaii, after he came back, went to school, went to law school, became a judge over there. So he's fairly well known, and I know he's made several trips to Washington to the Vietnam Memorial. But anyway, I'll just.
Hawaiian-born Alan Ho was drafted.
Nice, that's one of my favorite programs, Memorial Day, a concert over at the Capitol. Here it is.
In 1966. He arrived in Vietnam in December 1967, just before the devastating communist surprise attack known as the Tet Offensive. Here to share his story is acclaimed actor B.D. Wong.
As a teenager, my interests were surfing, hot rods, and chasing girls. But in my family, you've always heard stories about warriors, because we Hawaiians live in a warrior culture. Kids from my generation accepted you were going to serve. I was sent to Fort Sam Houston and trained as a combat medic. Most of my class got assignments to Vietnam, but I landed at the Presidio in San Francisco. After a while, I started to ask myself, am I worthy? So I submitted a request for transfer to Vietnam. The company first sergeant thought I was crazy. I knew that, but I also knew I needed to prove myself. They assigned me to a long-range reconnaissance platoon. The #1 job was staying alive. As a medic, you are responsible for the health and welfare of every guy in your platoon. On patrol, I never hesitated to be one of the first guys firing my weapon. After a while, you feel invincible, no matter what kind of horrors you've seen. I was on mandatory R&R when my unit went in to help some Green Berets and got overrun. 18 of my buddies ended up killed or missing in action on Mother's Day, 1968. The worst thing as a grieving parent is not knowing about the last moments of your kid's life. So when I got back home, I found my friends' families and did what I could to offer comfort. I got married to a wonderful woman, Adele. We had 2 amazing sons. Nainoa was our eldest. His name means he who is without limits. He was born the night of a full harvest moon. When he was 12, I took him to the Vietnam Memorial Wall and showed him the names of the men I'd served with. He grew up knowing their stories. Later, we went to watch the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Nainoa decided right then he wanted to be a soldier. Joined the junior ROTC program, enlisted, aced Navy dive school, passed Ranger school the first time. Nobody does that. Finally, he became a first lieutenant for the 25th Infantry Striker Unit. Nainoa loved serving. He gave everything to his guys. Mosul, Iraq, in 2005 was a dangerous place. 24/7 combat. Saturday, January 22nd, Nainoa and his team were securing a polling place. An enemy sniper identified him as the platoon leader. The bullet tore through a gap in Nainoa's flak jacket and pierced his aorta. A medic worked to keep his heart pumping. They raced through the streets to the aid station. None of his guys would leave. They just stood out in the rain, waiting. A trauma nurse found Nainoa's pulse and sent him to the operating room. But nothing could be done. The day he was killed, there was a full moon. Even now, whenever his men see a full moon, immediately they say, "That's our lieutenant." For me and Adele, the world just stopped. I was numb, in disbelief. Adele was incredibly strong. Our youngest son, Nakoa, was set to deploy to Iraq, but flew home instead. He lived up to his name. He who is courageous in the way he dealt with his brother's loss and shared our grief. After being a soldier in Vietnam, I thought I knew what loss meant. But let me tell you, until your son is killed in combat, you don't have a clue. I had a button made with Nainoa's picture and the words "My Hero" to wear every day. In May 2005, I was scheduled to speak at the Memorial Day ceremony at the Vietnam Wall. That morning, I presented traditional Hawaiian leis to 2 nurses who'd served in Iraq and were being honored at the Women's Memorial. I welcomed this young woman, Paula Coughlin, and started to put the lei over her head.
Now, there's the second part of the story here that he's going to tell is really what I wanted to share. Now we know a little bit about it, I gotta get it. But I want you to listen to it in Navajo's own words. I thought about when I heard this story, it reminded me of C.S. Lewis tells the story about friendship. And there's a book called Four Loves. See if I can get back. And he's got a quote about friendship. He talks about in friendship, we think we have chosen our peers. But for a Christian, there are strictly speaking no chances. The secret master of ceremonies has been worked. Christ who said to his disciples, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," and truly say to every group of Christians and friends, ye have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another. The friendship is not a reward for discriminating in good taste and finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to us, to each of us, the beauty of others. And I've always believed this, that as Christians, God puts people in our path, and it's intentional. And this story here that Alan Ho is about to tell, just listen to it. To me, it's incredible that it could even happen.
I thought it would be great to welcome these young trauma nurses with some special Hawaiian lei. And I saw this Army nurse come walking up the path. And I said, "Here, this is a special gift from me to you." And she put her head down so I could put the lei over her shoulder. She noticed the button that I was wearing on my chest. Then she just put her finger on it. And she said, "I know him." I said, "How do you know him?" "He was my son." And she said, "I was the trauma nurse at the crash unit where he died." And she said, "I will never forget that face." Both of us kind of looked at each other and we started crying, and I gave her a big hug, and you could hear this very audible gasp of all the people who were standing around us. But I could sense that something was bothering her. I thought she may have sensed that my family might have been disappointed in the fact that our son, his life could not have been saved. And I said, "I want you to know that my son was a warrior. He absolutely recognized all of the risks that were involved." She cried and she said that as the head trauma nurse, one of her tasks was to prepare his body for his men to have a last feeling. And she said that she tried to close his eyes, but as she went to press his lids together, they always would come open just a little bit. And she said that had bothered her all this time. And I looked at her and I laughed. And she kind of gave me this puzzled look. And she was like, "I'm curious now, why are you laughing?" And I said, "My son would sleep with his eyes partially open. His men, when they were in combat, they were never certain what they could do when the lieutenant was sleeping, because they never knew if he was sleeping or he was just awake watching what they were doing." And I said, "The simple fact that you shared that story with me totally convinces me now that you were with my son when he died." It was one of those miracles at the mall. It was absolutely remarkable.
So what are the chances that you'd run into somebody in that particular situation? She needed comforting, he needed comforting, and they comforted each other. And I don't know, to me it just touched me as a story that is pretty incredible. I have tried to come up with a good segue into, and I guess it teaches us, if you're in those situations, you know to be always alert, and that's what our lesson is about this morning. Page 97 of your personal study guide, I think is where it is. But it's known as the Olivet Discourse. And it was, I don't know if it was, I guess it would have been Wednesday or Thursday, when Jesus and the disciples left Jerusalem, and they were headed back up to the Mount of Olives, either to camp out there or go on back to Bethany to stay. That this conversation that they have with each other begins to occur. And as I say, it's Matthew 24, basically the whole chapter. And our lessons, I think, start at verse 36 through, which is 51, something like that. But there's also a part from Matthew 24, 1 through 35 that I wanted to just touch on. because so much happens to set our story up. And, you know, I've read that this is one of the most discussed and difficult parts of the Bible for everybody to agree on this. Because it's about the end times, it's about when Christ is coming back. And I told Wes I struggled with it a little bit because it's something I try to be alert, but I try not to worry about it too much. I try to just, in one part in here that reminded me, I think it was Jeremiah 29, when the Israelites were sent off to these other countries. Jeremiah told them to go, keep on living, you know, get married, have children, be a part of the culture that you're in here. And that's kind of what Jesus tells them here. The first part, I think it's the first verse of Matthew 24. They all turn around to look back at the temple, and the disciples are just noting to Jesus how beautiful it is, and that's when he tells them that no one stone will be left on another. And most people think that he was talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And I think in the next couple of verses, the disciples ask him three questions that really the rest of the chapter is about answering this. When will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming? And what will be the sign of the end of the age? Pretty big questions. And I guess we've been talking about them for the last 2,000 years. He talks about the beginning of sorrows. There'll be false messiahs and teachers, rumors and wars, famines. It's interesting here. He talks about towards the end, worldwide preaching of the gospel. And it's funny. There's 2 or 3 times that Jesus refers to the end times and how you know they're coming. And the first one here is when he talks about the beginning of birth pains for a lady having children. And as those birth pains start, you know that the end is beginning to happen. Talks about cosmic disturbances, darkened sun and moon, heavenly signs, and visible appearance of the sun and moon. And then he talks about, what is interesting to me, is that there will be a public, victorious return of Christ. All nations mourn, Jesus comes with power and glory, and angels gather his elect together. And he says that his return will be visible, it'll be powerful, it'll be universal, and it'll be final. There are lots of people that, we talk about the tribulation, the rapture, and I didn't have the time to get into that, or don't want to get into that, because I don't even know how I feel about it, so that's how other people might feel about it. But we hear it, we talk about, what all that's going to happen. But Christ's return will be visible, powerful, universal, and final. And then he gives another example about what is coming. We just talked about the birth pains. He talks about the fig tree. So when its branches become tender and its leaves appear, summer is near. Likewise, when the disciples seek to predict the events unfolding, they should recognize that fulfillment is near. So look for the signs that it's going to be coming. So, what are some of the major themes of Matthew 24? That Jesus has authority over history. He accurately foretells events before they occur. Believers must avoid deception. False teachers and counterfeit messiahs are recurring names. Suffering does not mean God has lost control. Wars, persecution, and upheaval are real, but they unfold within God's sovereign plan. We should always keep that in mind. Christ will return publicly and triumphant. His coming will not be hidden or ambiguous. Whatever happens, we're going to know. And I guess the whole world is going to know the way I think. Jesus' words are certain. So we are to stay faithful, remain watchful, don't be deceived, and trust Christ's promises that this is going to happen. So, from there, we move into what the two parts of the lesson that I've got is, first of all, is the unknown hour. And this is, Jesus' way of answering the question, okay, when is this going to happen? So let's read the verses. Matthew 24:36 through 40. Now concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven, nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. The two men will be in the field, then two men will be in the field. One will be taken and one left. Two women will be grinding grain with a hand mill. One will be taken and one left. So Jesus says that, and I guess, and I go back to the second chapter of Philippians, I believe it is, where it says that Christ humbled himself as a human, and probably hid some things from himself to make him human, so he wouldn't know everything. And I don't always try to figure that out, but I think that maybe that's what he's talking about here, that some things are hidden from him that he doesn't know, that anybody doesn't know. It's only the Father alone that knows at that exact time. And he gives kind of the third example here talking about when he's coming. He talks about it'll be like Noah in the ark. Noah was building the ark, and the people were walking by and laughing at him, trying to humiliate him on what he was doing. And the same thing here, he said that the people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, which is consistent. I think that's what the Bible teaches the Israelites that we should be doing. We should be living our normal lives. And they really didn't know until the flood came and swept them away. It said, then two men will be in the field. One will be taken and one left. And then the other two women, one will be taken and one left. And to me, I can make the argument that the two that are taken will be taken up into heaven. But I can also make the argument that the two taken will be taken to judgment. The ones that are left will be the ones that are chosen. So I don't know that anybody knows. Anybody got any? You got it.
I like that, no, I'm saying what?
But so, I mean, I don't know the answer to that exactly what it means, but it could mean either way. And then in verse 42 through 44, he tells them to be alert. Therefore be alert, since you don't know what day our Lord is coming. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you are also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So, if we were to know the time, we should be ready for it, right? We don't know the time, but we should still be ready for it. We should still be expecting, be alert that it will happen. It's coming. We've always heard about coming like a thief in the night. It's funny, when back in 1988, me and my family moved up to Allentown, Pennsylvania. For a southern boy, it was about the middle of nowhere as you get to. To me, it was foreign mission country. And I think to them, I was pretty much a foreigner. But anyway, the good news about it, it's interesting. Now, I remember when we moved up there, somebody told me a statistic that said that 25% of the nation's population was within a 4-hour drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania. That's how many people live in that area. It was about 2 hours to New York City. And of course, we would go into New York City when people come in to visit, we would always drive into New York City. And like I say, this started in 1989, I guess. And we would always drive in, we would park downstairs in the Twin Towers, and we would get on the subway, and we would go and take people, and this, and if you remember, I think it was 94 or 5 when the bomb, that was our parking lot, and we parked. Yeah. But anyway, what I remember when the first trip that we made into New York, in, I don't remember if it's 88 or 89, but I remember these people walking around with these signs that the end of the world is coming, and I don't remember the date, October 28th of 1989 or something like this, and I had no idea, of course, you know, I said, well, I don't believe that, because nobody knows, I mean, I knew what the Bible said about it, but it was interesting to me that people, for that particular time, somebody had come up with this is when it was gonna happen. And of course it didn't. And I don't know if you go in now, there'll still be people walking around with signs it's gonna happen sometime in the future. But it just struck me, how all these people had these signs that it was gonna happen. So, and nobody knows. You know, I do think, you know, going back, we talked about that the gospel was gonna be spread worldwide. You know, it seems to me like that's a sign that has begun happening, because the gospel is more and more spread around the world now. There are things that happen now that they say, well, yeah, maybe these are the end times. But you know, I don't want to say I've never been an alarmist, and I was telling Wes that I struggled a little bit with this, because I hate to say it, but I don't think about it a lot. I don't worry about it. I'm fine if he comes this afternoon. I'm fine if he comes this morning. I'm ready. Let's go. That's the way I feel. But you know, he gives us these warnings. Be alert. It's going to be at an unknown hour coming. And with that, I'll let you take it.
I think you completely hit on the point, though. I mean, the point of this is to be ready. I think that's the point. You know, he doesn't answer the questions to help them understand better. To some degree, he answers the questions to let them understand. The point of this is to be ready. You know, this is a very fascinating chapter and lesson for me. I love chapter 28. I mean 24. It is so disputed. I love this Christian disputes over you know, understandings and interpretations. In the New Testament, you have Romans 9. Then you have Matthew 24. It's the second most debated chapter. John 6 with the hard teachings of Jesus. James 2. There's a lot of them. You know, that a lot of people have a lot of different views on. But Matthew 24, there are so many views. You know, and for me, a lot of those views have a lot to do with just missing just the point of what he's saying, which is to be ready. You know, that is, if there's one thing to understand about it, that is the thing. You know, I told Wayne last night, I threw out half the stuff I was going to say just because it just takes us in all these different areas and all these things that don't really matter. You know, but I love that you touched on the in New York City, everybody holding the end is nigh. You know, that's the sign that you hold. You know, but those are that is a definite group of people. You know, that lives in this fear of it to some degree. You know, there's a lot of religions that push that fear on the forefront. You know, not picking on any, but I'll pick on one. Seventh-day Adventists, for example, for me, really are all about, you know, pushing fear of the end. You know, as the way that you better come to Jesus. You know, it's very interesting for me. You know, and anytime we talk about like apocalyptic literature, where we're talking about the end times, you know, Daniel 7, Revelation 20, there's just so much to learn out of it, I think, or so many different ways of looking at it, that, you know, an interesting thing I'll say first off, just the word apocalypse, the Greek word there is the same word that's Revelation. So when we say the Revelation, you know, the book of Revelation, it is the book of the apocalypse. It's the same word, you know. A better word that I like, though, is the unveiling. It is the revealing, you know. And we get that in Revelation, but so many times for us, I think in our modern setting, we lose that because we look at apocalypse as, oh, this is this big scene that happens at the end. That's kind of the way we use it in our modern words. But the word here, when you say apocalypse, when you're talking about biblical, literature, is, it's this unveiling. It is this revealing, and that's what Jesus is doing here as he's answering the disciples' questions. There's this very old, early church history view of this, where as he comes back, they're looking back at the temple. They're right there on the Mount of Olives, which you can see from there, and they're in this cave. And in this cave, they build all these different churches on top of it, and of course that's what they do in Jerusalem, is they build churches on top of things, And so he's there in this cave as they're looking back at the temple itself, and he and the temple, keep in mind, it is like one of the biggest things in the known world at that point. It's one of the most, architecturally, beautiful things in the world, And so as he's saying this, he shocks them with everything that comes out of his mouth. This won't be, on top of there won't be a stone left on top of each other. Just even in your generation, which that could go to another argument or discussion, but we won't go to that. We'll push into it. Go ahead, Peter. What do you got?
No, I said, you would know which way you were going to go.
Yeah.
It's within 70 AD.
Well, okay, that's good. See, okay, that's now, we're not going to go into it. There's just too many things to talk about there.
I'm not arguing against it.
Yeah. I will say my whole life, I did have one view. And I will say in the last 10 years, I definitely have different views on it now. I'll just say for me, I think the correct term is like a partial preterist, where I believe there's two takings. There's some that's right there for who he's talking to right then, and there's some for that hasn't happened yet. That's just my own. Makes it far more complicated, but that's okay.
It's either the rapture or the second coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, which one's the other, you're saying?
Well, the second coming judgment, the rapture is one person's there, one person comes.
Mm-hmm.
So it can either be either interpretation.
Sure. And there's a lot of interpretations for sure. Trying to stay on point though. If we pick up, we're on page 102 in our books here. We're going to read these 7 verses, 45 through 51. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master has put in charge of his household, to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, that servant's master will come on a day he does not expect him, and in an hour he does not know. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So I do feel like, just keeping in line there as we read this part, that faithfulness is what readiness looks like. And that's what we see in his examples here as he talks about this. Jesus starts this section with the question, well then who is this faithful and wise servant? What does that look like? And he goes into it, and I feel like as he's talking to them, the disciples are examining themselves, and I feel like that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing as well. But the whole setting here is the servant, he's been put in charge of something that belongs to the master. And so he's been given this, responsibility, stewardship is a good word, but everything that we have is entrusted to us by our master. And we're not the owners, we're the stewards. And the point that Jesus got here is he's not leaving readiness without a definition. He is giving them what it looks like. And how he does that, he works it out in these 3 parables that follow. We're really focusing on the first one here, but in Matthew, when Matthew sets up these blocks of teaching, he'll answer any question with 3 parables typically. So the first thing we see is that faithfulness begins with remembering that what I have belongs to the master. Verse 46 there, it's a simple verse. I think it's the cleanest in the whole section. Blessed is that servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. think that's the easiest, takeaway for us. He's doing his job. He's not speculating. He's keeping up with his responsibilities. He's not abusing his position, and he's not living like the master's never coming back. He is on task with what he's supposed to, what he's been, given as his duties. And so the faithful servant doesn't need to know when the master's coming back. He is there operating as if, he's doing exactly what he's been told to do. And I think that's sometimes we can get caught up in even end-time debates or whatever else to miss the basic part of this. I myself fell victim to that this week. In my preparation, I was all over the place talking about so many different views and I'm just like, I just need to just focus on the main thing here. But Jesus does not say, blessed is the servant who figured out the timeline. He does say, blessed is the servant the master finds doing his job. And I think that's so important, so many times we play the guessing game of, based on these things that I can see happening in the world. Jesus is, I'll predict he's coming back in 2034 or whatever, you'd want to say, that is so missing the entire point of this. I think it's honestly just the opposite of this, Ellen G. White, the famous, she founded Seventh-day Adventist. She said that in 1844 Jesus will come back. That's what they taught, And then there's many different, groups and different, I don't want to say, just different groups who cults who will assign a time, and here's the reason why, and they'll go into all these things, and that is absolutely, Jesus says at time and time, that's not for us to know. That's the whole point of this. In verse 47, truly I tell you, we'll put him in charge of all this. He will put him in charge of all of his possessions. So you have that faithful servant, and his reward is greater responsibility. And that's very interesting, I think. His reward's not described as doing nothing forever, which we look at sometimes. The reward is greater trust or greater responsibility, greater service. And so in his faithfulness is and a lesser responsibility leads to a more significant responsibility. And I think that brings us to, faithfulness in small things matters. Whatever it is that it is, has been our tasks that has been set in front of us is smaller than what we will be rewarded. So I think that makes it easy for us to see the importance of being faithful in our home or in our work or in our Sunday school or, how we speak to others or how we pray. So many different, things that we need to focus on, just the small things. Treating people who can't do anything for us. That there's so many different ways of looking at, all these small things. Verse 48 says, but if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed. And Jesus here, he turns the picture of this servant is different. And he calls him wicked just right off the bat. And we see the problem with him. We see that it starts with his heart. He says, my master's delayed. He doesn't necessarily say, I have no master. He hasn't forgotten about the master. He doesn't necessarily say he's never going to come back. So that's important to know also. He just simply starts living as if the master's delay means that he doesn't have to give an account for himself anytime soon. And man, that should be, and Jesus assigns that as wicked. It's spiritually dangerous. The danger is not always denying that Jesus will return. Sometimes the danger is living as if his return does not matter. A simple way to say that, I think, is that delay doesn't mean cancellation. I think so many times we can go in our lives and say, man, I have been alive for 50 years, 60 years, however long, and like I haven't really seen God's involvement in the world. All these terrible things are going on around me. How can God let these things happen, as if this little tiny, this generation, whatever you want to say, should be able to see, God's involvement. It's just, I don't know. We think a lot of ourselves, I think, to put those limits on God's activity in the world. But the master may be away longer than expected. that doesn't mean the master is absent forever. I think so many times we feel a distance between us and God, you know, and I think that does help us become careless or just casual about things, which is not what Jesus is saying to be here. We can start living as though the master will not call us to account. And you know, so many times for me, when I read verse 48 there, but the wicked servant says in his heart, my master's delayed. I don't know why, but I take it back to the Pharisees. You know, in chapter 23 here, he is all over the Pharisees. He calls them hypocrites and all these things, and he just goes all after them. And I feel like there's a lot of that here, you know, where there's these people who've been given this responsibility, and that is not what their focus is. But he, in verse 49, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards. And I feel like the problem there, his heart problem becomes visible as we see his actions. He mistreats others. He indulges himself. He takes his temporary authority and he's selfish with it for his own selfish purposes. Instead of serving others, he serves himself. Instead of feeding the household, he harms the household. And so everything here, I think, is the opposite. Those are opposite examples of what Jesus is telling his disciples. You know, the stewardship lesson here is the wicked servant's the opposite. He starts acting as if he is the master. He exercises authority irresponsibly, using his position to mistreat others and indulge himself. Another line is the wicked servant forgets that his authority is temporary and accountable. And I think that's a good takeaway for us there. It's definitely a danger. Anytime we use what God gave us mainly to serve ourselves, we're moving in the direction of the wicked servant. And that's a sobering line there. Verse 50, that servant's master will come on a day he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know. And so it's an unexpected event. And I think that's what we should leave it as, you know. So like we said 2 or 3 times now, you know, so many Bible students or people who take on themselves, they have this knowledge or prophecy or anything you want to add to it. I feel as if they completely missed the point here. There will not be an announcement of this event. There will be one standing in the field and no one will know. You know, I just feel like it's a blessing to some degree. For the one, the faithful servant, you know, that unexpected return is a blessing. For the wicked servant, it's judgment. And I think that's the way to draw the line there. But so the return of the master doesn't create their character, it reveals it. The return of Christ will not create our faithfulness. It will reveal whether we have been faithful. It's not because we should live in fear of every moment, but because we should live every moment under the reality that the master is coming. So lastly, verse 51, he will cut him to pieces, which is very strange language there for me. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And this is severe language.
It goes back, reminds me of Genesis 15, when God is making a covenant. In one of our Sunday school lessons, he talked about the ruler and vassal state. And when they signed an agreement, you know, remember God told Moses to cut all the animals in half, and they laid them out and walk between them. This is what's going to happen if I don't keep this particular covenant or promise that I made. Because interesting to me, that language reminded me of that kind of stuff. Which is pretty severe.
Absolutely. I feel like, if anything, he's showing that the unfaithfulness of the wicked servant is not a small matter. The wicked servant lived like the master's absence meant freedom from accountability. And when the master returns, he's judged. And I think that's something to understand. And Matthew says that he's placed with the hypocrites. Because like I said, you know, in verse 23, chapter 23, Jesus just, he tears the hypocrites to pieces. That's what he does. And now he turns and he warns his own followers. And he doesn't only warn the Pharisees. Here he is, he's warning those who belong to him, those who claim to belong to him. He does set a high standard for the Pharisees, but he also sets one for his followers. I think that's fair. All who profess to serve God must serve wholeheartedly and give an account to the one from whom nothing is hidden. And that's a pretty good one. Like I said, this is followed with two other parables. The 10 virgins, which is keeping with the same watchfulness and faithfulness. Where you have these the 10 virgins, and then the third is the talents, and all of them are saying, what does readiness look like while we wait for the Lord's return? I feel like if there's a point to this first parable here, the wicked and faithful servant, it's will the master find me doing what he assigned me to do? I think that's a good takeaway. The 10 virgins, you have those, Jesus talks about, they're waiting on the bridegroom, 5 are wise, 5 are foolish, but all 10 are waiting. They all 10 know that the bridegroom is coming. They all fall asleep, but only 5 are prepared for the day. And so the parable says, to be prepared for the delay. It takes longer than expected, but he still comes. And so that's a good takeaway there. And of course, the parable of the talents, which I'm only going into these because our book skips over them for next week, where we end up past them. And we can go back and touch on them if you guys want to. But the parable of the talents is so good. The master goes away. The servants are entrusted with this responsibility. The master returns, and there's this accountability that is the emphasis here again is stewardship. And one has 5, one has 2, one has 1, and it's not that everybody gets the same. It's just that you're responsible for what you receive. And each one of us in here, we all have our own individual responsibilities. It's not this shared responsibility. It's not, so-and-so has this, and I only have this. And it's not that. And so be fruitful with what you've been entrusted. And I think another takeaway question out of that one is, was I faithful with what the master gave me? That's a good one, which again ties to this. All of these tie together so well. The faithful servant teaches to be faithful in your responsibilities. The 10 virgins teaches be prepared for delay. And the talents teaches be fruitful with what you've been entrusted. And together they talk about this readiness. Where there is this waiting, there is this passive waiting that's involved, but readiness is faithful, prepared, fruitful obedience until the master returns. Anybody have any other?
It was a good setup for the parable of the sheep and the goats, which
Sheep and the goats was next week, yes.
But I think if you look at this, going back to the original question, when they ask, when are you coming? When is all this going to happen? When is this destruction going to happen? When is this judgment going to happen? Matthew 24 sets in place this expectation of judgment. You need to be prepared for this judgment. It's going to come. Now, that translates into guys on the streets of New York City with these signs trying to scare you by telling you there's this date. You better do it, because once that happens, you can't do anything about it. It's too late. So it is an expectation, and the fact that it's been 2,000 years, and some would say, well, it's never going to come. It didn't come in 2,000 years. It's never going to come. So just live your life, do as you wish, don't worry about it. And then the believer is saying, we're faithful. He is coming. Are you prepared? Are you prepared to be? And these parables get into back to the Sermon on the Mount. It's a lessons for the believers. My children, my believers, Christ is saying, these are what you need to know. And he's going to teach these through parables. But I think maybe next week we should spend a little time with the first 2, as well as just touch the main course of the lesson, which is the third. would scare us? It scares only in the sense that we're good enough.
Right.
Yeah, and then we're playing that game of works again. And this next parable, the sheep and the goats, you might say it's a discussion about works. It's not a discussion about works. Did you see me in these instances?
Just the thought of being held accountable.
Yeah. And so your son go by. It's through your college, right?
2028.
Here we go through. Thoughts? What does our philosopher say, Dennis? Any thoughts? Dennis, any thoughts? He did a great job.
I will close with, going back to my C.S. Lewis quote about people being put in your path, and I was thinking about people in this Sunday school class. You know, I didn't know Dennis till 6 or 8 years ago. I mean, much time has been, and how lucky we are for those people to be put in our paths. Peter and Wes, and just so many people that we think God doesn't have a part of our lives. He just does. Puts people in your path that are special.
Left and right arm. I can't do anything without the 2 years. Same thing with fellowship.
It's pretty. It's a wonderful thing. It's a pretty amazing thing the way God goes about things.
I completely agree. I feel like even the timing of when people are put in your life is so, it's just supernatural, I think is the way to say it.
Reminds me of, those of us that can. There's reels, if you're watching YouTube, they set aside based on your viewing history, things that you're interested in. Well, I get a bunch of stuff, about Christianity. And there's this guy sleeping, it's a video on YouTube, he's sleeping. And there's sirens going on, and noise in the city and everything. And he's just, sleeping right through it. And all of a sudden, he hears a trumpet, and he's waking up. It's a sound I'm supposed to know. When that trumpet happens, things are going to happen. This is not like Jesus being born in a quiet little Bethlehem. The second coming is going to be known. And then some people are going to say, oh no, I've lived too well, and I haven't done well with God.
When you lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania, was it, were there a lot of Amish in
Yes.
that area?
We were about an hour away from the Amish country. That's the other place we went quite a bit. We went, there's a place that's not even open anymore, called Good and Plenty, which was a family style restaurant. It was a big place. And when we moved up there, and I tell when my parents helped us move up there, and I remember when they drove away, it was one of the loneliest feelings that I've ever had. I'm sure you guys experienced when you get back, if you want to call it home, when you get back to Myanmar, you're alone. I mean, and there we were, not knowing. I knew some people at work, but I didn't know anyone. And every 3 or 4 weeks, we would go down to Good and Plenty because you sat at a table with 10 people and just be at a table and talk to people because we just didn't know anyone. So it was kind of our outlet. Yeah, we spent a lot of time in the Amish country. We loved
Do
it.
they worship in the home, is that correct? Do they have church building?
They had some school buildings, but I don't think they had any church.
No, they worship
Their homes.
in the elders' homes.
I've always been intrigued with the Amish. I think it's kind of neat.
It is.
I don't know nowadays.
I don't understand it. I never understood it because you couldn't have a tractor, but they could have the mules pulling a hay baler with an electric engine on it, and the hay baler working. And I think, I don't know where the line is.
I agree.
Right back.
Technology has a strange line to it,
Yes, it does.
because even like the
Not
hose,
straight, it's
even the
good.
hose, a level of technology, it's
Yes.
just, or the pulley or whatever.
Reminds you of our discussion about what you can and can't do in the Sabbath, all the rules, the It is time.
I'll pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this time that we have to come, as your people and help one another and pray for one another and live our lives together. We're so thankful, God. We pray that you would be with this church, be with the service now as we go and worship you. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
Now, one of them things I want to
We ain't there.
It looks good, see?
It's not there.
And it was raining about
Yep, they, apparently, 5 or 6 years ago, it's like everything else, you know, land's gotten so high. I think the people was, family wasn't interested in keeping it going and running,
Okay,
so
that
they just
sounds
sold the
good.
property
We need one.
and left.
Were you, I can't remember, were you at the church when we did a bus trip up there to the church?
No.
Okay. We went to church and then. That area.
Because they were talking.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time.
We went to a party at Lime Mountain.
Yep.
Was that?
At when I was up there, I was up there 40 years ago, I must be there, whatever. They built it, it wasn't an RV or something, it was a theater.
They had Lime Mountain.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. It's some good reading here.
Anything else to do? There you go.
This is also, it's about the truce in 19,
And they were like,
the Christmas truce. The German, the French, and the.
Weirdest thing that ever happened.
Got together and they decided to listen to you.
And I was living back here, right after 9/11.
Superiors know about all the stories.
The following week,
They took all 3 different groups.
I had to look at this.
The Germans they sent to the eastern.
Piece of equipment, and I decided to buy it.
And the others
And it was,
were.
that place outside of Amish.
That's a good one.
So I just drive up there.
Very good, very good. Glad you had a good trip there.
It was a good trip.
Coming back, I said, this close to good plenty.
John, how you doing?
I said, this was
Doing
the
okay?
day after 9/11. Good. I went there at lunch to eat.